Dr. Christopher Cameron is an associate professor of history at the University of North Carolina. He's the founder of the African American Intellectual History Society, the author of To Plead Our Own Case, African Americans in Massachusetts and the Making of the Anti-Slavery Movement, and the co-editor of the New Perspectives on the Black Intellectual Tradition. His most recent book, Black Freethinkers, explores the history of secularism in the United States. Dr. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Humanism Now.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you on the show, and we're very much looking forward to hearing more about Black Freethinkers in your event with both our groups and SI Martin on the 22nd of September. But I think perhaps just to start, it'd be great to find out more about your background and your personal journey to humanism and what inspired you to write the book.
Yeah, sure. So I had probably a somewhat unconventional path towards humanism. So I wasn't really raised traditionally religious. My mom's side of the family is French Catholics from Quebec, and they had migrated down to New Hampshire in the 60s. Growing up, I went to church once or twice a year, Easter, midnight mass, that type of thing, not really important. Every once in a blue moon, my mom would feel guilty about, not really exposing us to church. And oddly enough, she wouldn't bring us to a Catholic church. She would bring us to like some storefront evangelical church or something like that. We'd go for a couple of weeks and then, fall off. But I actually sort of turned more towards religion when I was incarcerated. So I got into dealing drugs when I was in high school. I got arrested in June of 2001. And I went to a county jail in Manchester, New Hampshire. And probably a week or a week and a half into my sentence, I remember I was reading this book called An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser about a young man who had committed a murder after achieving some success in life. And he's sitting in jail at the end and, pondering his whole life. And I could kind of relate, not to the murder part, but to the sitting in jail and wondering, what have I done, and he accepts God at the end and it's all good. And that kind of pushed me to do the same thing, right? I remembered some religious lessons from my grandmother growing up and got on my knees and did the whole, Jesus come into my heart and everything. And so I thought I was saved. I thought I was good to go. But it was kind of weird because after that, I immediately started questioning the entire thing. Well, am I really saved? How do I really know? Jesus didn't actually tell me or confirm that I am, So even, I was having doubts pretty soon after. I get out after 8 months in 2002, and I was basically forced by the state to attend religious recovery, right? Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. They say there you don't have to be religious, but it seemed pretty religious to me, like state sanctioned and forced religiosity. So I did that for a few years till I got off probation. Ended up transferring, going to college. And then transferring to a school out in Western New Hampshire. Wasn't really particularly religious there or anything. Then when I went to grad school, that's when I actually got into kind of formal religion, right? I started a PhD program in history at UNC Chapel Hill in 2006. And I was one of two Black PhD students in my cohort. And there just weren't a lot of other Black graduate students in general. And I was kind of searching for community, right? And I was also kind of wrestling with questions of my own identity and my own Blackness, being a mixed race person. So I ended up going to the AME church in Chapel Hill, African Methodist Episcopal. I joined the church. I was pretty ardent for about 6 months. And then it just started to feel really empty to me, right? I didn't feel like I was going through all the rituals and the motions out of any innate desire. And I also started looking around and kind of questioning what was going on in the services. The same person catches the Holy Spirit at the same time in the sermon every single week. Why isn't the Holy Spirit more egalitarian? Why wouldn't he spread his holiness around to other people? Why is it the same dude? at the same time every week. So then it started to feel really empty and kind of meaningless to me. And I just started realizing like I didn't believe in this stuff. So, I was searching for a little bit. I went to the Quaker meeting in Chapel Hill for a while, and I could kind of get with that, right? Because it didn't seem religious. um, we would go, we would meditate, basically. Sometimes somebody would say something. Other times we would sit there for an hour, all basically just meditating together. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. I was reading some like Eastern religions and philosophy at the time. So, um, I could kind of get with that. And the Eastern philosophers I was reading, one in particular was Jiddu Krishnamurti. Um, and I kind of came upon him by accident, just watching a movie and seeing a movie about Reuben Hurricane Carter called The Hurricane, and seeing Reuben Carter reading this book by Krishnamurti while he was in his prison cell called The Awakening of Intelligence. So I went and I got the book, and I got a few of his other books. And Krishnamurti really attacks our belief and adherence to traditions and rituals simply for the sake of this is how it's always been done, right? And his books really show kind of how ridiculous it is to just believe in something for no other reason than this is how we've always believed, right? And so I don't think he was necessarily an atheist, and certainly not a part of the secular movement. But for me, he was like a sort of way station towards atheism and humanism, right? He got me thinking about just traditional Christianity and kind of questioning everything that I'd been taught. And from there, I would then discover some of the writings of, the new atheists, Susan Jacoby and Sam Harris and Dawkins and Hitchens and others. And I was immediately convinced, right? That, yeah, I just read them, and it just really made sense to me. The arguments against traditional conceptions of God and for evolution, and especially for the way that religion has harmed societies around the globe, and the critical damage that it's done, even from like religious moderates and some religious liberals, right, given sanction to some of the more extreme and radical forms of religion. So this was probably about my second, going into my third year of graduate school, so looking at about 2008, 2009. By the time I finished my PhD in 2010, I was pretty fully identified as an atheist and a humanist. So that's kind of the sort of religious path for me.
Yeah, and I can see it's like at various points, different elements of the religion kind of get chipped away. It was interesting actually that, the ritual side of things, which I think is often seen as one of the positives of religion, that was the thing that you were turned against as well.
Yeah, it was strange. Just like stand up now, sing this song now. Like, I don't know. It just really kind of turned me off for some reason. Although that's not necessarily, and I think it might have been the rituals combined with the theology and the religious messages, because when I've attended, I guess, secular churches, if you will, one of which I was just at about a week and a half ago, the Houston Oasis down in Texas, I'm not turned off by, the kind of more churchier parts of this secular meeting, right? But I was in the context of a traditional church.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you said you were kind of open, turn on to how have done harm in history.
Mhm.
Do you feel like religion it continues to do harm in the US?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, we can see this with the religious right and its, close relationship to the very radical and leaning towards, if not already fascist, Republican political party in this country. And religion, looking specifically at, the African American community, still continues to sort of harm us in terms of religious discrimination, and just sort of religious sort of shaming of individuals. We see something like the recent Supreme Court decision that banned abortion, or that sort of overturned Roe versus Wade, not banning abortion, but overturned the decision, Roe versus Wade, and allowed states to now ban abortion at their level. Like, that's basically what the religious right has been fighting for years, and we're already getting reports of women having to flee to other states and being afraid of being persecuted and prosecuted by authorities in their home states. Some states are trying to now make laws where if you travel to another state to get an abortion, you can be prosecuted. So, I mean, it really seems like we're moving towards some Handmaid's Tale type stuff in certain states. It's not at the national level yet, but the religious right certainly does want to ban abortion at the national level, even though they claim to believe in states' rights.
Mm. And was that rising threat part of your inspiration behind why now was the right time to write Black Freethinkers?
Part of the inspiration was, one, my own research into sort of religious discrimination against African Americans and even practitioners of African traditional religions. But it was also just my own kind of budding and growing identity as an atheist and as a humanist. So um, I had pretty much fully accepted atheism by about 2010. I finished my dissertation that same year, so I took a couple of years. I revised my first book, and then around mid to late 2012, I was looking for a new book project. And that's when I kind of also stumbled upon different blogs and some different Black organizations like African Americans for Humanism. I found Black non-believers and started connecting with some folks online. And on the blogs and websites of these organizations, I would see, individual profiles of particular Black freethinkers, right? A couple of paragraphs on Zora Neale Hurston or Langston Hughes or somebody like that. So that started to pique my interest. I'd come across some of these and then go back, like a historian does, go back to the primary sources and, okay, well, you got this little excerpt of Zora Neale Hurston's Secularism from this source. Let me go back and read the entire thing. And when I started to do this, I started to just think that, there really is something to, there being a significance of Black secularism in African American intellectual and political history that doesn't really seem to have gotten a lot of attention from historians, right? We have, biographies of particular individuals, and as an afterthought, their agnosticism or atheism will be mentioned. But I wasn't really finding that any historians had written an overarching history exploring the importance of secularism in African American life, whereas there are hundreds, if not thousands, of books exploring the significance of religion in African American life. So I thought something needed to be done about that. And so it was really just kind of a perfect confluence of my own individual interests and me being able to bring a key part of my identity, but also needing a second book for my job and needing to kind of keep publishing and the like, and finding that this is an area that I could really make an important historical contribution.
And did you find that the roots of African American secularism were distinct from a lot of the narratives and stories that were told, were being told about the rise in secularism generally, or is this very much a similar story that in terms of where these questions started to arise from?
Yeah, no, they're absolutely distinct. So if we're looking at the rise of secularism among white intellectuals and thinkers, like Thomas Paine and Jefferson and Ethan Allen and others, We really look to kind of two key sources. One is Enlightenment philosophy and the application of ideas about natural laws to religion and the sort of rise of deism called the religion of nature. And we also look to a lesser extent to the rise of kind of liberal Protestantism during the 18th century, sort of a forerunner to Unitarianism. So that could be sort of again, kind of like Krishnamurti was for me, sort of a way station towards deism and secularism. That wasn't necessarily the case for African Americans because with the restrictions in just about all Southern colonies and then states after the American Revolution, most enslaved people were forbidden from learning how to read, right, and could face incredibly severe punishments for doing so. So they weren't necessarily as conversant with Enlightenment thinkers, but they were nevertheless intelligent individuals themselves who could, look at their world, reason, and kind of think about the ideas that they were hearing about the nature of the world, about religion, about the character of God, and they could come to their own conclusions based upon their experiences. And for most enslaved people, those experiences were suffering and brutality and physical punishment and separation from family and distress, right? Not to say that there weren't times of joy with the birth of a child or getting married or anything like that, but a central and critical component of slavery was the suffering, right? That's how it was maintained. So you had enslaved people who were like looking around and thinking, I can't believe that there's a just and omnipotent and benevolent God who cares about my interests and who created this world, right? If there is a God, it must be one that hates Black people. But for many, it's just easier to believe that there's no God altogether. So you do see during the late 18th and throughout the 19th centuries kind of parallel developments of secularism, with white secularism being based largely on Enlightenment philosophy, and Black secularism sort of emerging out of the lived experiences and realities of slavery. Those two would come together a bit more in the later 19th and moving into the 20th century, when African Americans are able to access both secondary and higher education, when they are able to become more conversant with Enlightenment thought. So curiously enough, you actually see Rousseau and Paine and Montesquieu playing more of a role in Black secular development during the early 20th century than it did closer to the time period when they were writing. I found evidence of folks like Hubert Harrison and Harry Haywood in the early 20th century talking about reading these 18th century European philosophers and how they influenced their views on religion.
Yeah, that's right. And the book chronicles, all that history and lots of the characters who've helped shape the thinking. I wonder, were there any individuals whose stories really stood out for you in researching the book as perhaps people that we should know more about?
Yeah, absolutely. One is a woman named Louise Thompson Patterson. And when we think about, Black secularism, there are some figures that maybe do stand out, right? We might think, okay, Frederick Douglass, right? Or perhaps W.E.B. Du Bois, or looking at the civil rights era, like Huey Newton, right? And a lot of the folks in the Black Panther Party. Louise Thompson Patterson is somebody who is much more kind of understated and hasn't received as much attention, but I was able to find a lot of evidence for her kind of growing secularism in an unpublished autobiography that she nearly completed and went through a few different drafts of, and is located in an archive at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And there she talks about her experiences with religious discrimination and racism growing up in Washington State, in Walla Walla, Washington, and other kind of smaller, more rural areas of Washington State in the early 20th century. She then attended the University of California, Berkeley, in the early 1920s, and would articulate her opposition to religion in sort of a number of different arenas in her life. She ended up being a really prominent member of the Communist Party, which really opened up a lot of opportunities for leadership for Black women that were not available to them within African American organizations, especially Black churches, right? So she was a really prominent communist organizer, an atheist and a free thinker, and she lived an incredibly long life. She lived till she was almost 100 years old, right? So she was around and friends with Langston Hughes in the Harlem Renaissance, and she lived into the early 90s. So she saw almost the entire arc of the 20th century and was really critically involved in some key moments in Black political history. So yeah, kind of finding that evidence about her was just really amazing. I actually went to Emory to work in the papers of Alice Walker, who I knew was a free thinker because she had won the Humanist of the Year award from the American Humanist Association. So I knew that, and I had access to that published speech. I went to work in Walker's personal papers just to read through all of her letters and see if there are other connections. And when I was talking about the archivist, he told me about Louise Thompson Patterson's papers. I'm like, all right. So that was a really great and exciting find for me.
It does seem like there's more female voices in this story than perhaps we usually hear in as I said, the European narrative of the Enlightenment right the way through to the new atheist movement. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a reason behind that?
Well, I tried to be really intentional about finding all of the evidence I could from Black female free thinkers. And this is in large part motivated by the pioneering work of the contemporary female Black free thinker, Sikivu Hutchinson, whose books Moral Combat and Godless Americana I really just kind of ate up. And that kind of pushed me to look for all the historical female Black free thinkers that I could, and to really just highlight their stories as much as possible, because you're right, they haven't really been told. So I tried to, include people like Patterson and Nella Larson and Hurston and others to show that they were, critically important in this history and really drivers at some points of the kind of conversations around Black secularism.
And I'm wondering, was there anything which you changed your mind from in researching and putting this book together? Was there anything you found particularly surprising?
The main thing was organizational. So I was going to, initially the book was going to go up to 2020, right? Black Freethinkers basically ends around the civil rights era, though. And then I have an afterword that kind of traces some of the history after 1975, but does so very sort of briefly and perfunctorily. And that's because as I started gathering materials for the post-civil rights era, I found that there was just so much that it was going to be too unwieldy of a final chapter, right? Even the last chapter of Black Freethinkers on the civil rights era, that was pretty long. I think it was close to 70 manuscript pages, right? And I had way more materials for the post-civil rights period. So yeah, I decided that I was going to write a second volume as a follow-up that just looked at the period from 1975 through 2020.
Oh, we look forward to that. And when can we expect that to be out?
That's probably going to be out more closer to the end of the decade. So right now, I'm finishing up the manuscript on a book exploring the history of African Americans and Unitarian Universalism. So I'm gonna have that book drafted probably in about 8-9 months or so. Then I'm writing a sort of short history of humanism in the United States that I'll have done by the end of next year. After I finish up those two, then I turn in 2025 full time to working on the second volume on Black Freethinkers. Right now, I'm more kind of collecting sources, writing notes to myself, sort of starting to put together what the chapters are going to look like and what's going to go in them. But I haven't really done a ton of archival work for it yet, nor have I begun writing it. But kind of like, the first volume of Black Freethinkers, I think it's going to go quickly because I'm just so passionate about it and I love the subject that, once I get started on it, I think I'll probably finish the research and writing within like 1.5 to 2 years. So I anticipate that second volume on Black Freethought will be out sometime in late 2027, early 2028, something like that.
Great, and I'm sure we're going to have plenty to talk about when we meet in person on the Friday, 22nd of September. So I wondered as well, what has the reception been like to the book? Now that it's been out and you've probably had a chance to get some feedback.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty good. I've been invited to give talks all across the United States. I've had good crowds at many of these events, and it's especially been well received by Unitarian Universalists, which is not a particularly diverse denomination, but they're very, very interested in the history of secularism and have really kind of eaten up this work on Black secularism. So that's probably the one kind of group that I've given more talks about Black Freethinkers to than any other ones. But the reception I think has been pretty strong from UU churches to secular organizations throughout the U.S. and some universities as well.
Well, that bodes well for the success of your next book then, if the Universalists particularly keen.
Yeah.
And what about the state of Black Freethought since the book's come out? Do you think it's contributed to a rise?
I'm not sure my book has contributed to a rise, but I think there is already sort of a broader movement away from institutional religion within the United States, and the recent Pew Forum for the Study of Religion has kind of shown that shift in Black religious life and in American religious life more broadly. But I do think, for the audiences that I've spoken to, I have gotten a lot of feedback from people that said that, they never knew any of this history, and it sort of inspired them to kind of talk to their family about their own beliefs. So I do think on a kind of more individual level here and there, my book has had some impact, but I don't think I can necessarily take credit for sort of the larger trends that were already kind of in play before the book was published.
So definitely, yeah, we'll have plenty to talk about next week at the event. So if anyone's interested in finding out more in this area, are there any other books you would recommend aside from your own?
Yeah, Michael Lackey has a book called African American Atheists and Political Liberation. It's very academic. It's kind of a literary analysis of some of the writings of early 20th century Black atheists, but it's a really great sort of in-depth look at sort of the development of Black atheist thought at the time. And then basically anything written by Anthony Pinn, who's been working in the area of Black humanism for nearly 3 decades now. I would especially suggest his edited collection By These Hands, a documentary history of African American humanism, as well as his book The End of God Talk, where he sort of works to develop in African American humanist theology. So yeah, Michael Lackey and Anthony Pinn. And Sakibu Hutchinson, who I mentioned earlier, has some wonderful works on the intersections of gender and Black free thought.
And if anyone listening would like to find out more, what would be the best way to get in contact or to follow you?
You can email me at christopher.cameron@charlotte.edu. It's my university email address, or you can look me up on Facebook. And I'll be happy to get back to you, and look forward to meeting a lot of folks listening to this next Friday.
Absolutely, yes. And so if you are interested to join Professor Cameron in conversation with S.I. Martin, that's next Friday, 22nd of September in London. Find out more at centrallondonhumanists.org.uk or at the Central London Humanists meetup page. But Chris Cameron, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening. Looking forward to hearing much more, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you again for having me.
Pleasure.